There is a persistent myth of progress, that globalization and its complex, fragile supply chains are modern inventions. The historical ledger, however, tells a different story. It reveals that our most modern systemic risks, the reliance on a single component sourced from halfway across the world, are, in fact, ancient. The collapse of an entire age hinged on this very vulnerability. Now, let's open the historical ledger and analyze the economic blueprint this crisis left behind. The world of 1300 BC was, by any measure, a globalized system. From the powerful Hittite Empire in Anatolia to the new Kingdom of Egypt, from the Mycenaean palaces in Greece to the city-states of the Levant, a network of unprecedented complexity bound civilizations together. This was the Late Bronze Age, a system built on a shared technological and economic foundation. When we analyze the structure of this world, we find what economists call palace economies. These were not free markets. They were vast, centralized command and control systems. The palace, in Hattusa, Mycenae, or Thebes, was the central node for production, storage, and redistribution. It funded massive chariot armies, commissioned monumental architecture, and managed the flow of all critical resources. As the Linear B tablets found at Pylos and Knossos illustrate, this system was meticulously managed. We see lists cataloging everything: jars of olive oil, bushels of grain, and, most importantly, stockpiles of metal. This entire edifice, this interconnected world of empires, rested on a single alloy: bronze. Bronze was the high technology of its day. It was the material of power. It equipped the armies with bronze swords, bronze spearheads, and bronze-scaled armor. It was the material of economic production, providing the tools that harvested crops and built cities. Control of bronze was synonymous with control of the state. But bronze is not a natural metal. It is an alloy, a precise mixture. Roughly 90% of it is copper, a resource that was relatively abundant. The great copper mines in Cyprus, known then as Alatia, supplied the region for centuries. The Eluberan shipwreck, discovered off the coast of Turkey and dating to this exact period, provides a stunning snapshot of this trade. On board, we find 10 tons of raw copper ingots. But the other 10% was the system's critical vulnerability. That component was tin. Without tin, copper is just a soft, pliable metal. It cannot hold an edge. It cannot protect a soldier. Without tin, there is no bronze. And without bronze, the entire economic and military structure of the Late Bronze Age ceases to function. Here, our analysis confronts the central problem. Unlike copper, tin is exceptionally rare. The major deposits known and exploited by the Bronze Age world were not in the Mediterranean. As geochemical analysis of bronze artifacts confirms, the primary source lay thousands of kilometers to the east, in the remote riverbeds of what is today Afghanistan and Central Asia. This established a supply chain of extraordinary length and fragility. Animated maps showing the tin route from Afghanistan to the Levant. This tin, the 10% ingredient for 100% of the system's power, had to be mined, processed, and then transported by donkey caravan across mountains and deserts, through myriad intermediary territories, before it even reached the trading hubs of Mesopotamia or the Levant. From there, it was loaded onto ships in ports like Ugarit and sent onward to Crete, Greece, and Egypt. The palace economies, for all their centralized power, were entirely dependent on this single source, high-risk supply line. This was the system's hidden flaw, its single point of failure. The empires of the day, much like a modern corporation relying on a single overseas factory for a critical microchip, had built their entire world on a logistical assumption. They assumed the tin would always flow. For centuries it did. The system worked, and the empires flourished. But when we look at the system as analysts, the risk is glaring. It was a structure defined by profound interdependence, but almost zero resilience. The interdependence was the risk. Every palace, every army, every farmer's sickle was systemically tied to the stability of a trade route thousands of kilometers away, a route none of them directly controlled. This was the ordinary world of the late Bronze Age. It was sophisticated, wealthy, and powerful, and it was balanced on a knife's edge. That knife's edge was pushed. Around 1200 BC, the intricate system of the late Bronze Age did not just decline, it imploded. This period, which historians call the Late Bronze Age collapse, was a catastrophic, cascading failure that saw the end of entire empires. The Hittites vanished. The Mycenaean palace system disintegrated. Great cities like Ugarit, a key trading hub, were burned and never resettled. For decades, historians sought a single catalyst. Massive earthquakes, widespread famine, or the mysterious invaders known only as the Sea Peoples. But when we analyze this as a system failure, no single event is sufficient. The collapse was a perfect storm of stressors, climate change driving migration, internal rebellions, and, yes, the disruption of maritime routes by the Sea Peoples. The critical insight is this. These stressors were not the cause of the collapse, but the trigger. They attacked the system's single greatest vulnerability, its dependence on the tin trade. We can see the panic in real time. The clay tablets from Ugarit, a rich port city in Syria, serve as a final, desperate voicemail from the dying world. One letter from the king of Al-Ashia, Cyprus, warns Ugarit's king, "Behold, the enemy's ships came. They set fire to your cities and have wrought havoc in the country." Another, from the king of Ugarit himself, is a plea for help that was never sent. It was found still in the kiln when the city was destroyed. These raiders, the Sea Peoples, were not a conventional army. They were a systemic disruptor. Their primary impact was the severing of the great economic arteries. They destroyed the port cities. They shattered the maritime networks that moved copper from Cyprus and, crucially, tin from the east. When we analyze the cascade, the logic is brutal and swift. Phase 1. The supply shock. The attacks on ports like Ugarit and the destabilization of the Hittite Empire, which policed the overland routes, mean the tin supply is no longer intermittent. It is gone. The flow from Afghanistan to the Mediterranean stops. Phase 2. The production seizure. The palace economies immediately face an existential crisis. The central foundries go cold. As this chart illustrates on-screen chart, bronze production inputs, copper is plentiful, but it is useless. The 10% tin input has gone to zero. Therefore, bronze production goes to zero. The state can no longer manufacture the high-technology material that forms the basis of its power. Phase 3. The military and economic cascade. This is where the value of capital versus labor is thrown into chaos. The capital, bronze, becomes infinitely valuable, but its velocity, its movement through the economy, freezes. We see this clearly in the archaeological record. The period is marked by a dramatic increase in bronze hoards. These are not offerings. They are the equivalent of a modern citizen stuffing cash under the mattress during a bank run. It is scrap metal, broken tools, and old weapons, buried in the ground with the desperate hope of recovery. This tells us the economic system has seized. Bronze is no longer a medium of exchange or production. It is a static, hoarded asset. Simultaneously, the palace's military advantage evaporates. A chariot army is the most resource-intensive weapon of its day, requiring constant repair, replacement parts, and highly trained crews. Without a steady supply of new bronze, these armies cannot be maintained. They cannot replace broken swords, shattered armor, or damaged chariot wheels. The palace's side of the social contract is now broken. The central authority, which organized the labor of tens of thousands to produce grain, oil, and textiles, can no longer fulfill its primary duty, to provide security. Phase 4. The systemic collapse. The result is a complete political and economic unraveling. When the capital, bronze, is frozen and the central authority can no longer provision its military, the value of centralized labor also collapses. Why deliver your grain to the palace stores when the palace can no longer protect you from raiders or famine? The system fractures. Citizens abandon the cities. The complex, interdependent palace economy, a marvel of centralization, shatters into small, isolated, and impoverished local units. The great empires fall. The population of the region plummets. Literacy itself disappears in many areas as the scribal classes who manage the palace redistribution system become obsolete. This is the ordeal. The old world, built on the assumption of a stable, globalized supply chain for tin, has been proven non-viable. The survivors are thrown into a dark age. But this dark age was not an end. It was a crucible. It was a forced rebalancing. The collapse of the tin trade created an enormous, system-wide incentive to find an alternative, a new policy forged not by government, but by necessity. The survivors, now living in a decentralized, resource-scarce world, could no longer rely on complex, long-distance trade for their essential materials. They needed a solution that was local and abundant. They found it in a different metal. This metal had always been present, but it was considered inferior. It was difficult to work, brittle, and required much higher temperatures to smith. But it had one overwhelming advantage. Its raw material, iron ore, is one of the most common elements on Earth. Animated maps showing iron ore deposits scattered everywhere versus the single tin route. The collapse of the Bronze Age system, triggered by its reliance on a single-source supply chain, created the economic pressure that forced the adoption of iron. This was the rebalancing. The old, globalized system died, and a new, decentralized system based on a readily available local resource was born from its ashes. The Iron Age was not a technological upgrade. It was a logistical necessity. It was the solution to the catastrophic failure of the tin trade. When we emerge from the crucible of the late Bronze Age, we return not just with a historical narrative, but with a powerful diagnostic tool. The 3,000-year-old pattern of the tin trade is not a curiosity. It is a durable intellectual framework. This is the elixir from our journey, the reward of our analysis. We can call this framework the tin principle. The tin principle states that a system, be it an empire or a corporation, becomes critically fragile when its core, high-value function depends on a single source, non-substitutable input, and the supply chain for that input is long, high friction, and outside of the system's direct control. Now, as analytical mentors, we turn this lens from the past to the present. We look at our own globalized world. Our modern palace economies, the vast interconnected systems of technology, defense, and finance, are also built on a high-tech alloy. Our bronze is computational power. This power is the foundation of our entire economic, social, and military structure, from artificial intelligence and global logistics to high-frequency trading and advanced weapon systems. This bronze is also made of two parts. The copper is plentiful. The data, the algorithms, the software, the less advanced commodity chips that run our cars and microwaves. But the 10% ingredient that enables all high-performance computation, is the advanced node semiconductor. On-screen image, a close-up of a complex semiconductor die. These are the chips below 7 nanometers, the brains that power AI data centers, supercomputers, and the most advanced smartphones. When we apply the tin principle, the parallels are staggering and precise. For decades, our system has operated on the same logistical assumption as the Hittites, that the tin will always flow. But where do we source this component? As this chart illustrates, on-screen chart, global foundry market share, advanced node logic, Over 90% of the world's most advanced logic chips are manufactured by a single company in a single specific location, Taiwan. The entire palace economy of the modern world, from Silicon Valley to Frankfurt to Tokyo, is systemically dependent on a supply line that runs through one of the most geopolitically contested regions on Earth. The Taiwan Strait is our modern-day Levant coast. The journey from a foundry in Hsinchu to a data center in Ohio is a supply chain more complex and, arguably, more fragile than the ancient tin route from Afghanistan to Mycenae. The Sea peoples of the 13th century BC have their modern analogs. They are not mysterious raiders, but the known and analyzed stressors of our time. A geopolitical miscalculation, a naval blockade, a regional conflict, or even a single devastating earthquake. If such a disruption occurred, the cascade would be identical to the one we analyzed. Phase 1. Supply shock the flow of advanced chip stops. Phase 2. Production seizure. The world's largest companies, Apple, Nvidia, Amazon, the global automakers, cannot complete their highest value products. Their foundries, their bronze factories, go cold. Phase 3. Cascade. We would see the modern equivalent of bronze hoards as corporations and nations desperately stockpile any remaining chips. The capital of the digital economy would freeze. The velocity of innovation would cease. Economic and military power would cease. The lesson of the Iron Age is that systemic resilience is not a cost. It is a prerequisite for survival. The survivors of the Bronze Age collapse were those who adapted, who found their iron, a local, abundant, and secure resource. When we analyze the current geopolitical landscape, we see the tin principle being acted upon in real time. The multi-billion-dollar CHIPS Act in the United States and the European CHIPS Act are not just industrial policy. They are a direct, systemic response to a Bronze Age-level vulnerability. They are the modern palace economies frantically trying to build their own iron supply, domestic fabrication, before the Sea peoples arrive. This is the power of the framework. It allows us to cut through the noise of daily headlines and see the underlying systemic forces at play. We can use this same tin principle to analyze other vulnerabilities. Our reliance on single-source suppliers for pharmaceutical ingredients, or the concentration of rare earth element processing, critical for green energy and defense, in a single nation. The Bronze Age collapse is not a prophecy of our own doom. It is a timeless case study, a gift of foresight. It teaches us that the greatest risk is not interdependence itself, but fragile, unexamined, and single-source dependence. History's ledger does not offer simple predictions. It offers diagnostic tools. The Bronze Age collapse is not a story of a world that ended, but a timeless lesson in systemic risk. The tin principle is the elixir we bring back, the clarity to see the hidden frailties in our own complex world. By understanding the pattern, we are no longer just victims of history, but potential architects of a more resilient future.